in Cape May and other places. And that's something I had actually put together for the mayor and commissioners some months before that. And then, to my delight, Wallace Montgomery expanded greatly on that, emphasized greatly, and they evaluated cities and towns nationwide and came to us with quite a lot of detailed data. So that was extremely helpful in completing the picture. And in addition to that, they brought actual parking usage data from the Institute for Transportation Engineers. And the nice thing about that is that, you know, the code is one thing in every place, but the actual usage may be something different. So the usage patterns were assessed irrespective of the code in that particular area. So it really completed the picture nicely, I think. And we've taken, you know, public comments throughout the process and questions about the approach and the needs of the city. I always say that codes are like snowflakes, and no two are exactly alike. And as a result, we must develop our own recommendations based on the unique features and unique needs of Rehoboth. And I think we've done that over these 3 meetings. For example, we decided fairly early on, I think, not to change the parking requirement for smaller retail establishments and restaurants. And this is important because there is a trend nationwide within the planning community, and Commissioner Strange spoke about this at the last meeting, to do away with minimum parking requirements. And what I think is interesting about that is we were decades ahead of that trend, decades ahead of that trend. You could even say we started that trend, I suppose, because our code was created with minimal and, in fact, no parking requirements for these smaller retail and restaurants. And as a result of that, we've been very successful because we brought in small businesses without them having to take on the burden of having a parking lot next to their restaurant, for instance. And over the years, we've become a dining destination, I think, as a result of that. So I think we can pat ourselves on the back, as I believe someone speaking at the very end of last month's meeting said that. He thought it was genius that our code was written that way, and indeed it is. I think I agree with that. But overall, parking has always been, probably always will be, a challenge, especially during the high season. I mean, we've seen photographs from the 40s and showing exactly the same thing. And the parking code has, in fact, as far as I can tell, has never been altered. The parking code we have today is the one that was written whenever our initial code was written. But changes in the city and the surrounding area make it necessary to at least consider updating the code. And I think what we zeroed in on was that hotels, sort of almost by definition, have an outsized impact on the city. They sleep dozens, if not hundreds of people, and the trend now is to have more of them. So right now there are a dozen hotels in the city, and there are probably 4 more on the drawing board right now, and probably more in the future. So we're looking at potentially a 50% or greater increase in the number of hotels in the city. Currently, we have 1,100 hotel rooms. That's going to go up substantially. So at the same time, we do need to continue to protect our small businesses and restaurants, as well as providing parking for the daily visitors that are coming from the growth in Sussex County, and our residents and their guests in our residential areas. So people are always saying that Rehoboth means room for all, and I think that means that we have to do the best we can to provide for our various constituent groups. So one of the things that I'm pleased that we were able to get, I spoke to the head of the Chamber of Commerce between the last meeting and this meeting to add one piece of data to our puzzle here, which is that asking our current in-town hotels how they handle guests that bring more than one car. In fact, really the first question was, how often do they do this? Because the information we've had up to this point has been pretty anecdotal. And we have on the screen here the results of the survey, and it's also attached to the agenda for the meeting. But and 7 of the 12 hotels responded. I don't know which 7, but it's a good response to give us a sense of all the, especially given the uniformity of responses. I think it's a good overview of the entire city hotel plan. Only 1 respondent said rarely. The majority of them said it does occasionally happen, and 1 hotel said it often happens. But what's really interesting is to look over at question 4, to what does the hotel do when someone brings more than one car? Even though a couple of them said, well, if we have the space, off-season or whatever, if we have the space, we might let them. But every last one of them, all 7, said that they recommend that guests purchase a parking pass in the city. And that really gets to the issues we talked about in our earlier meetings about, hotel guests are taking up space on residential streets, and therefore a residential guest or a visitor for the day is inconvenienced as a result of that. So the increase that we have been talking about for spaces related to hotel rooms is really an incremental, it's a fractional increase that takes into account, it does not happen every day. It doesn't happen, all year long, but it happens, which is what the survey confirmed. It happens. And so it's really incremental. And in addition to that, we had long conversations about the meeting space within hotels and how that brings even more people in who are not even staying in the hotel. They may just be coming for an event or a meeting. They may not even be going to a restaurant in town. And we need to make sure that spaces are provided for them. So that has been added as well. We purposely did not add any requirement for parking for a restaurant or a shop that happens to be located in the same building as a hotel because of the fact that all the restaurants and shops in the city don't require parking. So just to have equity, we would still maintain that emphasis on small. And that's really what our code, that's the goal of the code, to still maintain the incentive and the emphasis that it's had from the beginning. But so there is a resolution today that we can discuss, and we can either vote it up or down.
All right. I'd like to have at this portion of the meeting any general comments, general considerations. We debated this fairly substantially, I think, the last meeting and before. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say at this point before we consider a motion and move one way or the other?
I do have a question, and maybe I'm getting too deep in the weeds, and there are attorneys here present that can help me understand if I'm too far in the weeds on this one. But as I look at the definition regarding what counts as space within a hotel that would generate a need for additional parking for every 250 square feet of XYZ, as I think about the challenges that have come before multiple boards within the city, it has often come down to a question of ambiguity within the way the code was phrased. I'm wondering if other people might be concerned of a circumstance where, well, you know what, it's not a conference room, it's not a meeting room, it's a big open atrium. Now, then they're approved for not parking. It gets built, and the next thing you know, they're hosting weddings with 500 guests. So am I over-focused in the weeds about how we write that definition? Otherwise, I'm in full support.
But does this actually, doesn't this really go to use as opposed to square footage, whether it's a pretty room, an atrium, but if it's used as a conference room, and it's sort of like if a duck quacks, I think you know what it is. Would the building inspector have any insight into that? Matt?
No, up here. I can tell by the size that perhaps he's faced this.
The unfortunate thing, I guess, is that the plan declares the space, and if it is not that space when we inspect it, obviously I would say something at that point. But at that point, it'd be far beyond, anything that I could say. At that point, it's assuming that parking structure is already built. So it's not like they could add additional parking at that time. So we would have to be upfront about it right from the get-go. We'd have to be on our game to be able to catch that at the beginning of it.
But don't they designate in their plans what the intended use is?
They do.
And so if they violate that, is that not really a violation of code?
It is, and that would prevent me from applying any kind of certificate of occupancy until something was changed. Either we got more parking, or they changed the use of the space, or something occurred.
What would happen if they changed the use of the space several years down the road? Would that have to come back for, so you'd catch it in the building permit process?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out that on the red line of the new ordinance, which I assume will be on the screen in a few minutes, it reads for one parking space for every 250 square feet of gross floor area devoted to meeting, conference, banquet, event, or similar communal space. So I know we want to avoid ambiguities, but I think that pretty much encompasses most of the uses, because I think the issue is a good one. But if you have this big open space and somebody going to have a wedding, and all of a sudden you have 300 folding chairs,
Right.
which is generally what happens, that would seem to be covered by the event or other communal uses.
But John, is your question not so much one of definition as to how to enforce that designation later, or a change
They're
of use?
interrelated. And we've had conversations about issues outside of this venue. And that's really where things become quite challenging, in that there are discussions around what the word means, and does this particular circumstance fit within an agreed definition of that word? But then once we get past that, enforcement after the fact relies on eyes other than employees of the city. It takes citizen complaint to bring anything forward.
Mr. Chair, if I may just offer, I think you raise, as always, a very good point. And anytime, and remember, this body is simply making a recommendation to the actual legislative body. So this is not the legislative body. But you raise an excellent point. And it's always a balance when drafting legislation. Do you want to define every word in the statute, in which case your lexicon is going to be this thick? Or do you want to assume that people can apply a common meaning and a common sense meaning to certain words? And at the end of the day, that's the question that the legislative body. So one thing, and when I get around to reading the resolution, it's simply a draft resolution. This is your resolution, it's your motion, it's not mine. If you want, one thing you may want to consider is including a recommendation that the Board of Commissioners consider defining certain terms that are used in the red line. And therefore, I hate to say, you sort of punt the issue of adding definitions to the legislative body.
Well, I'm not sure it's a definitional problem as it is a code enforcement after the fact problem.
Yeah, I'd like to make the same point. In my view, the language is clear about how the requirement applies. If it is an event area, I think it gets captured. So if it's an atrium, and it is an atrium that is intended to be used for this use, and it is above the square footage requirement, I believe it is clearly captured by the existing language. Having said that, we live in a less than perfect world. I think that the issue that is troubling you most, John, and is potentially an issue, is the issue of enforcement. However, with that said, there are always enforcement issues associated with any ordinance or any statute. We don't ordinarily write legislation presuming everyone is going to ignore the legislation. In fact, the intent of legislation is to precipitate and encourage and prescribe behavior in accordance with accepted rules. So the idea of realizing here in our internal discussions that there could be a problem is not one that necessarily, to me personally, stops my heart. Citizens often file complaints, often encourage people to follow the rules. That then brings about the full play of whatever tools are available within the community to do that. So I am worried about, perfect being the enemy of good. I think we have a very acceptable definition which targets the uses. I worried about this, and from a different standpoint, because I was thinking about what issues would we have in terms of people trying to thread the needle. But I think the language as drafted does a marvelous job in terms of capturing this idea of common use facilities that are, gathering places, all being swept up in this, whether it's a banquet area, an event space, a conference room, or a similar type of facility.
Matt, does your office have injunctive powers to seek injunctive relief so that if somebody is violating, you go in, they file the plan, it says it's an atrium, and 2 years later, they've got, all sorts of wedding events or some such. Do you have the ability to go in at that point and say you're in violation of what you filed with us and therefore you're going to stop?
Thank you, Chair. I believe we do. Obviously, we would consult with representation to get that accomplished. There might be a search warrant involved or something like that to be able to go in the premises, but I believe we do.
I would think one source of citizen complaints might be competitors.
Yeah. Has happened
Mr.
before.
Chairman, I would just like to suggest that the phrase "devoted to" might also be a way to eliminate some ambiguity. I can think of 3 other options. I don't propose one particularly, but one could be available for, one could be reserved for, one could be designated as. Those could be substitutes or additions to the phrasing there. And
Use them all?
I take our council's admonition against drafting on the fly, but I think we all have an understanding of what we're attempting to capture here. It might be possible, though, especially since we are not adopting final language, to recommend that the commissioners, if they want to, consider some alternatives.
I am fully cognizant of your comment. And so one thing I try to do here is to use language similar to, analogous to what's already in the code. And that phrase "devoted to" is, for example, in subsection 7, that's not being changed. And try to, be as true to existing language as I could.
But seriously, if you said that it's devoted to, available for, designated as.
Used as.
Used as is what
Used
I was
as.
thinking,
Yeah.
I would say all of them.
Yeah. Is there a consensus on that? Okay.
I'd be fine with expanding it to include used as and available for, yeah.
Anything else? Good point, Mr. Dewey. All right, Mr. Mehta, you made reference to a motion, I believe, or resolution, I'm
It would
sorry.
be a draft, it would be a draft resolution that has been circulated to the members of the Planning Commission. I've received a couple of suggestions, typos. There's a suggestion, which have been addressed. There's a suggestion here, which, if you give me a second, I could try to incorporate that in. But I think the idea, but obviously it's not been debated yet. This is the time for public debate and discussion of the resolution. I could read the motion in. You could give me a second. I could try to tinker with it based on the comments just now. And then the idea would be for there to be a motion, one way or the other, pro or con, and then you as a public body would make a vote on whether you want this to be the resolution reflecting your recommendation to the legislative body. So I'm happy to proceed however you want to. I can read into the record the existing one, or if you give me 2 minutes, I can make this modification and read in a resolution that would incorporate the changes that were just
Why
suggested.
don't you work on that task? And Ms. Gay, do you mind reading the resolution into the record?
Or the resolution would have to pick up this language as well.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah, so just give me 1 second, please. I'm pretty sure where to, and you can, if I may be so bold as to suggest that you help me with it, and that way it'll be reflected. So it would be it'd be recommendation number 1, that City Code Section 270-35D3 be amended to increase the minimum number of off-street parking spaces required for a hotel, motel, or inn as follows: 1.2 for each rental room, plus 1 for each 250 square feet of gross floor area. The current language in the resolution, that draft resolution that you have seen but not debated yet, is devoted to meeting, conference, banquet, event, or similar communal space. And so if we're going to make a change, I could make that change. That would be reflected in your revised resolution.
Yes, please do.
So I believe we said devoted to,
Used,
used as,
available for.
or available for.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Offered.
Advertised.
Yeah.
Devoted to, used as, or available for meeting, comma. If you give me 1 second, I'm not sure I can make the change to the red line at the same time, but maybe I can.
And then I think later in that same paragraph where we talk about office space, we'd have the same language track there, I think. Is that okay with everybody? So it's not just devoted to office space, it's available for, designated as, used.
Yeah, could we just not stick office space up in the conference, banquet, communal, or office? And
So, again, this is
Not
a
a problem?
drafting issue. With all due respect to the city planner, that was the city planner's suggestion.
Have it separate?
No, it's the city planner's suggestion was to lump it all in. And from a drafting point of view, I thought it'd be better to separate out office space from these other communal, yes.
Yes, yeah, we're trying to make it clear for each type of use what the
But it's the
parking.
same, it's the same ratio, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same one for 250 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't think it matters.
Okay,
So
right.
this is,
Just trying to put fewer words rather than more.
see if
you
I
don't
can
know a
do
lot
this
of
here.
lawyers.
I am one.
Okay.
Since I'm working off a red line here, I want to make sure that, just give me 1 second, please. I think I can do this by just doing it this way. All right, devoted to, used, no, it's not going to work. Used as,
Available for.
used as, let me just track the language. Give me 1 second, let me just track the language from the. Devoted to, used as, or available for. Devoted to, used as,
Available for use as.
Voted to use that or available for use as.
Okay.
Is that language also going to go?
In the next, after that semicolon, in the next phrase about office space.
Right. Same thing for office space.
Mm-hmm.
Voted to used as or available for use as. Yes?
Correct.
And then there's number 5.
Yes, that same track change would happen in number 5, that's right.
Well, this is, well, hold on, this is a slightly different, so the 3, this is where I hate doing this on the fly, but so 3 is hotel, motel, or inn. 5 is medical, dental, and legal offices, and here the language that is referred to is as a carve-out. It's exclusive of basement if not used for office.
I'm sorry, I was, number 5 in the resolution.
Oh, I see, I'm sorry.
I think the only one we're talking about is clarifying the hotel meeting space.
Okay, so let me go back to the, or available for use as. And 5,
You don't need any changes, 5 there, yeah, 5 in the resolution.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, so that-
8.
all right, so let's go, just want to make sure, because, so this is here, this is all other commercial uses. So are you suggesting the same change that we just discussed for purposes of hotel, motel, and inns? Would be thoughtful about this before we make these changes on the fly.
This is a completely different section, and it talks about all other commercial uses devoted to sales or service. I don't know that we need the clarification here.
Yeah, I don't either.
I mean, I think it'd be pretty clear if it were a separate structure. First of all, parking is required. If it's identified as a commercial use, then parking is required. Doesn't matter what kind of use. If it's not one of the uses specifically spelled out above, if it's an other, then parking is required. So does it need further clarification? I thought John's point was just about the hotel space being,
I don't think,
yeah. Okay.
is there a consensus on this, please?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So that is the resolution. Are you going to make a similar change on the draft, the red line of
I just
the
did.
code?
I just
Okay.
did. So would you like me to read the revised resolution, which has not been debated yet, so it can be moved on one way or the other and debated?
Well, aren't you going to move that yes.
I would read the idea would be to read the resolution into the record, both for your benefit as well as for the public's benefit. And then you all can decide whether you want to move on it. Okay?
Please.
So I will read, this will maybe the longest portion of the meeting. I will read a draft resolution. Again, remember, you are not the legislative body. The legislative body is the Board of Commissioners. This is a recommendation upon referral from the Board of Commissioners back to the Board of Commissioners whenever you adopt it. Resolution of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommending to the Board of Commissioners upon referral certain changes to zoning code section 270-35, minimum parking spaces required, exceptions. Whereas on September 6, 2022, the Mayor and Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, convene a workshop during which the topic, Section 270-35, minimum parking spaces required exceptions, was discussed. Whereas following the September 6, 2022 BOC workshop, the BOC referred to the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission the task of analyzing parking with respect to the zoning code and making recommendations for changes to the zoning code, if any, to the BOC. Whereas during regular public meetings of the Planning Commission on January 13, February 10, and March 10, 2023, the Planning Commission discussed possible recommendations to the Board of Commissioners pursuant to the referral. Whereas certain amendments to the City Code, Section 270-35, are necessary and appropriate to address potential ambiguities resulting from the manner in which portions of the table thereunder is currently drafted, such as using the phrase "same as above." Whereas the Planning Commission received from Wallace Montgomery, the city planner, a report dated February 9, 2023, titled Parking Standards Recommendations, in which Wallace Montgomery summarized parking standards in other Delaware coastal communities and other resort communities along the U.S. East Coast, standards published by the American Planning Association, and relevant information contained in the Parking Generation Manual published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Whereas, for the purpose of promoting public health, safety, and the general welfare of the city, the Board of Commissioners has adopted and from time to time has amended the city's zoning code. Whereas, the purpose of the zoning code includes to lessen congestion in the streets, to secure safety from fire, panic, and other dangers, to promote health and the general welfare, and to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation and other public requirements. Whereas, the zoning code regulations are made with reasonable consideration, among other things, as to the character of the district and its peculiar suitability for particular uses, and with a view to conserving the value of buildings and encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the city. Whereas, the lack of adequate parking, including the lack of adequate off-street parking in the city, is well known and documented. Whereas traffic congestion in the downtown commercial zone of the city is related to the lack of adequate parking, including the lack of adequate off-street parking in the city. Whereas, by way of example only, the city's recently adopted on June 28, 2022, and certified as of June 28, 2022, 2020 Comprehensive Development Plan, the 2020 CDP, states at page 1-2 that Rehoboth Beach's challenge is to maintain a balance among local and regional identities, quote, which requires addressing its traffic and parking problems. Whereas, by way of further example only, the 2020 CDP articulates at pages 1-12 and 5-21 the following action item: continue to evaluate the need to address parking during peak season. Whereas, by way of further example only, the 2020 CDP provides at page 5-20, quote, since the 2020 CDP, the city has seen several new development projects as well as some long-standing businesses relocating outside of the city limits to allow for structure and parking expansion. Whereas, by way of further example only, the 2020 CDP states at page 6-2, as outlined in the 2020 CDP and still relevant for this 2020 update, the city recognizes the critical importance of managing traffic, particularly during peak periods, minimizing traffic congestion, and reducing conflicts between pedestrians, bicyclists, and motor vehicles. It's a quote, but it is maybe grammatically incorrect, but it's a quote. Whereas, by way of further example only, the 2020 CDP notes at pages AC-9, AC-15, and AC-23 that some of the biggest challenges facing Camp Rehoboth, the Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association, and Cape Henlopen Senior Center include downtown traffic congestion and lack of adequate parking. Whereas, the Wallace Montgomery report concluded that the minimum number of required parking spaces in other Delaware Beach communities for hotels ranges from 1.0 to 1.75 spaces per guest room, in some cases in addition to spaces for associated office and other uses, as well as for employees. Whereas the Wallace-Montgomery report concluded that the minimum number of required parking spaces in other East Coast resort communities for hotels ranges from 0.33 to 1.5 spaces per guest room, in some cases in addition to spaces for employees, meeting spaces, and other associated uses. Whereas the Wallace-Montgomery report concluded that the American Planning Association example parking standards reflect a range of required parking for hotels from 0.7 to 2 parking spaces per guest room, in some cases in addition to parking spaces for hotel banquet, assembly, and meeting spaces, as well as for employees. Whereas the Wallace-Montgomery report concluded that the minimum number of required parking spaces in other Delaware Beach communities for office space ranges from 1 space per 400 square feet to 1 space per 200 square feet. Whereas the Wallace-Montgomery report concluded that the minimum number of required parking spaces in other East Coast resort communities for office space ranges from 1 parking space per 500 square feet of office space to 1 parking space for 150 feet of office space. Whereas the Wallace-Montgomery report, among other things, recommended that the city consider 1, increasing the parking ratio for hotels from the current minimum requirement of 1 parking space for every guest room to 1.2 parking spaces for every guest room. And 2, including certain hotel accessory uses such as conference rooms, gathering areas, or similar meeting rooms, as well as banquet halls, dance floors, and similar communal spaces under the classification of quote-unquote office space, and increasing the minimum number of parking spaces required for such office space from the current 1 parking space per 400 square feet of office space to 1 space per 250 feet of office space. Whereas the city's traffic and parking problems include, but are not limited to, the downtown commercial district. Whereas adopting changes to the minimum off-street parking requirements for hotels, motels, and inns at this stage would be a rational exercise of the city's power and authority and would not preclude the city from adopting other changes to Section 270-35 of the code at a later time, including with regard to off-street parking requirements for other commercial uses and for residential uses. Now, therefore, and this is a proposed resolution, nothing's been resolved, you'll vote on it. Now, therefore, it be proposed to be resolved by the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission in session met this 10th day of March 2023, that upon referral from the Board of Commissioners, the Planning Commission recommends to the Board of Commissioners that City Code Section 270-35, minimum parking spaces required exceptions, be amended as follows and as reflected in a comparison redline document that will be forwarded to the Board of Commissioners consistent herewith. 1, that City Code Section 270-35 D3 as in dog, be amended to increase the minimum number of off-street parking spaces required for a hotel, motel, or inn as follows: 1.2 spaces for each rental room, plus 1 for each 250 square feet of gross floor area devoted to, used as, or available for use as meeting, conference, banquet, event, or similar communal space, plus 1 for each 250 square feet of gross floor area devoted to office space. 2, that City Code Section 270-35D as in dog 3 be further amended to delete the current requirement of 2 parking spaces for, quote, the resident family, unquote. 3, that City Code Section 270-35D as in dog 5 be amended to clarify that the minimum number of off-street parking spaces required for medical, dental, and legal offices 10,000 or over square feet in size is 1 for each 400 square feet of gross floor area, exclusive of basement if not used for office purposes and exclusive of underground parking areas. 4, that City Code Section 270-35D as in dog 7 be amended to clarify that no parking spaces are required for a retail store or service shop 15,000 or less square feet of gross floor area, exclusive of underground parking areas. And 5, that City Code Section 270-35D as in dog 8 be amended to clarify that the minimum number of off-street parking spaces for all other commercial uses shall be 1 for each 200 square feet of floor area devoted to sales or service and exclusive of underground parking areas. And the referenced red line is referenced in the resolution is here. It's not the perfect red line since I made some of these changes on the fly here, but you'll get the picture. The only changes would be to 270-35D as in dog. And you'll see the red line here reflects the amended changes that were just read in that resolution. So for D3, it would now be 1.2 for this be hotel, motel, or inn, 1.2 for each rental room, plus 1 for each 250 square feet of gross floor area devoted to, used as, or available for use as meeting, conference, banquet, event, or similar communal space, plus 1 for each 250 square feet of gross floor area devoted to, used as, or available for use as office space. And you go down to D5, and this is the reference to the ambiguity resulting from the prior or current language in the code, just same as 4 above or same as 7 above. So 5 for medical, dental, and legal offices, it remains less than 10,000 square feet in size, no space is required, but amended to clarify that 10,000 or over square feet in size, the actual requirement. 1 for each 400 square feet of gross floor area, exclusive of basement if not used for office purposes, and exclusive of underground parking spaces. So restating the current language that is in 4. It's actually restating it just as opposed to saying see above. And then similarly, under 7, clarifying that for retail, each retail store or service shop, no spaces are required for such retail store or service shop for 15,000 or less square feet of gross floor area, exclusive of underground parking areas. And then finally, 8, similar to the prior comment, instead of saying same as 7 above, simply restating the requirement to eliminate any confusion. So the parking spaces required for all other commercial uses under 8 would be 1 for each 200 square feet of floor area devoted to sales or service and exclusive of underground parking areas.
All right, having concluded our discussion, is there a motion to approve or deny the motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission recommending to the Board of Commissioners upon referral certain changes to the zoning code, section 270-35, minimum parking spaces required and exceptions as just read.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there a third? Is there anyone, member?
Debate by the commissioner.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any further debate, any further discussion of this issue?
Mr. Chair, I just have, there is a confusion in one of the whereases, and I don't know how important this is, but in the third from the last, it refers to
What page are you on?
I'm on page 4.
Okay.
And that would be the second whereas. It refers to the guest room 1.2. Then it says, and 2, including certain hotel accessory uses such as conference rooms, gathering areas, or similar meeting rooms, as well as banquet halls, dance floors, and similar communal spaces, under the classification of office space. And that's not what we're doing. And I just find that confusing, and I don't know how to handle that, Luke, whether that.
Yeah, so again, this is what I alluded to earlier in response to another comment. The purpose of this whereas clause was simply to accurately reflect what the recommendation was from the Wallace-Montgomery report. You all can choose to adopt or ignore or modify recommendations of the planner. So all that this whereas clause purports to do is restate the recommendation of the planner, not what your affirmative recommendation to the Board of Commissioners would be.
I understand that, but again, it can lead to confusion if people read this and then compare that to the actual resolution. And do we need, therefore, to state somewhere in the resolution that we are not accepting that particular part of the Wallace-Montgomery report?
It's my view that it's quite clear because you are breaking out office space from the other communal spaces in the recommendation that you are making.
Okay.
But that's just my view.
Well, I think what you're saying is that the resolution now therefore be it resolved, and all paragraphs after that would carry the day as far as what we are recommending.
Yes, the operative language is the language that follows the be it resolved.
Part of the resolution, okay.
The other was just background.
Yep, correct. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, I have a process question. If there is going to be a voice vote, then I have some remarks as to why I'm going to vote the way I am, and I would make those now. If it's going to be a roll call vote, I would simply vote and then explain why I'm voting as I am. I don't have any preference.
Let's go ahead and give our reasons at this time,
Okay,
so we can vote individually.
all right. Well, since I have the floor, I guess. In my
But I'm
view-
not calling for the vote quite yet. I'm asking for any public comment first, and then we'll vote. Is that
Okay, I'm sorry. So not comment from us.
Not at this point. Right. Right. But see, they can state their. Is there anyone from the public that cares to comment on this matter? And we hold you to only 30 minutes. All right, let's vote. Mr. Ellison,
I vote yes.
and please
And,
give us your rationale.
Yeah. It's clear that the city has a parking problem. We have reviewed a lot of information, data from our consultant and from other sources. And I still, having gone through all of that, I still believe that somehow we do have a unique situation in this city. Not only do we have restricted number of entrances and exits to the city, but we do have the parking problem. But beyond that, I feel that for hotels in this city, the principal purpose is getting to the beach, which means a lot of gear, filling cars, and for that reason, I just feel that what we're proposing here is a very, very, very minimal change, which I think is well-founded on the basis of all of the information that at least I have been presented.
All right, sir. Mr. Strange.
I'm going to abstain. And the reason being is there are several things in here that I do agree with, that I think are necessary to update the city's code. But the major one of increasing the parking requirements for hotels to 1.2 from 1, as Susan pointed out, we were very progressive 50 years ago. Although right now, you don't find too many hotels with resident family living there. But the point is, I'm very concerned about unintended consequences that go far beyond the parking issue. The parking issue is really the sequela from a whole series of other issues that in many cases are positive. We have a parking problem because the city is so successful. What I'm concerned is that increasing for hotels the parking requirement from 1 to 1.2 may have serious unanticipated consequences, very similar to what happened when we, as a body, recommended that underground parking not be calculated in the FAR. We never, ever thought that it would be then used as a justification because of the expense of what it took to install underground parking on the coastal area. It was so outrageously expensive that for a return on investment, you had to build it higher, bigger, more hotel rooms, et cetera. So there's a lot about this I like, but there's one particular point that I can't support at all, and so I abstain.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hunter.
I'm going to vote yes for this. I think that we have been fully briefed on this, and all of us, I believe, are taking this very seriously and giving this a lot of consideration. To me, there are several factors that stand out. One is, of course, the need for more adequate parking, and certainly the need to not exacerbate the problems of parking that we already have. When we worked on the comprehensive development plan, it was loud, clear, and pretty close to unanimous expression of the concern that city residents and business and visitors all have with regard to parking. We saw that in the surveys we did of those 3 communities. We saw that in the responses we got from a number of the community organizations. And I think, I feel like I'm just making the record here on an obvious point, which is probably that if you did a vote among everyone in Rehoboth about what the biggest problems that we face are, that parking would be right up there. So we have a need to think very seriously about requirements for parking when we have additional significant demands for parking that are created by new structures, which is the situation that happens with regard to hotels. We have seen, thanks to the survey done by the Chamber of Commerce, and I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce specifically for doing that survey, and also thank my colleague, Commissioner Gay, for thinking of the idea of doing it. But we have data before us as to the impact, not only the need, but the impact on the availability of parking that comes from our hotel guest, and the impact on parking for all of our city guests and residents and others who are not staying in hotels. And so we have need, we have impact, and a number of other considerations that sort of stood out to me. One is, it is a measure of our success, certainly as a city, that Rehoboth is becoming more and more of a year-round destination. So the need and the impact, although they're not as extreme in the off-season as they are during the summer, they continue to be issues throughout the year. A second factor, and this distinguishes us from probably some areas where the number of parking spaces per hotel room has has not been increased or maybe has been decreased. So we have no public transportation to speak of here. And as my colleague, Mr. Ellison said, the nature of our destination is such that people bring a lot of stuff because you take chairs, blankets, coolers, whatever, you take a lot of things with you to the beach. And that requires motor vehicles. Those kinds of items really cannot be very well transported by bicycle. And we don't have an Amtrak station here. We don't have a large nearby airport. And so people drive. And that also exacerbates the issue. And the last thing I would point out, and this is in reference to something that was mentioned just a minute ago, we're dealing with hotels that are becoming larger and have more uses than in the past. So, for example, we eliminated a requirement, the requirement of 2 spaces for the resident family, because the concept of the resident family goes back to when probably most of the available rooms here were in boarding houses and similar kinds of, converted single-family homes. So I very much support eliminating a requirement that no longer makes any sense. And that's also part of this resolution. So for those reasons and for reasons also expressed by Mr. Ellison, I'm going to vote yes on this motion.
Thank you. Ms. Gay?
I also vote yes, and I concur with the comments made by my fellow commissioners Hunter and Ellison, and I'll just say I think it reflects our current needs and the balance needed in the city for all constituents.
Julie Davis?
I also concur with Commissioner Ellison, Hunter, and Gay in their comments. The only thing I would add is that we've focused to a substantial extent on the fact that the overflow parking from hotels tends to be located on our residential streets by virtue of being able to buy a parking permit. Commissioner Hunter mentioned the responses that were provided in 2019 to the survey that was done in connection with the 2020 CDP. And there were 3 surveys. One was the community survey, property owners and residents within the city. Second was a visitor survey. The third was a survey of business owners. I read those several times, all 3 of them. And while I was not the least surprised to read that visitors and residents thought that parking kept coming up over and over and over again, and I think it's safe to say it was the single biggest issue mentioned by all of the respondents. I was a little bit surprised to see that the business community was as concerned about the lack of parking because of the overflow of some of the visitors to the city who might otherwise have been patronizing their shops or restaurants, because there were all of these cars on the street for people who, and several of them I think mentioned from some of the people who were staying in hotels, were parking on the streets but not necessarily eating or shopping within their establishments. So I think, it's the business community has, I was going to say a dog in this fight, skin in the game, but I think we all do, and I think this is a very well-reasoned resolution and at least for now, a measure to address a problem that's been long-standing and really does need attention.
Thank you. Earl Stockdale?
I, too, would like to express my agreement with the prior speakers who have all spoken in favor of the resolution. I consider the requirements we are proposing to establish today to be reasonable and appropriate. I think they take into account the lack of parking space downtown, traffic congestion, safety needs, the needs of balance between local and regional identities, And prevailing conventions and requirements with respect to these matters that have been established by both municipalities and hotel interests. In reaching that conclusion, I gave substantial weight to the recommendations of Wallace Montgomery, which showed that the conditions, requirements we're adopting today are both reasonable and appropriate and well within the range of standards that are adopted by other Delaware communities and other East Coast communities within the example standards of the American Planning Association, and consistent also with the survey that was sent to the various hotel owners. I want to say a couple things about those things specifically. In terms of the parking space requirement per room count, I thought intuitively the minimum requirement of one space per room was just too low. Most of the prior speakers have addressed, loaded cars full of equipment, but I think it's important to point out that Rehoboth Beach is an important destination stop for families that live in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C. These are areas where families often have two-income owners. Those people are often on different schedules. They often have children living at home who drive. They often have children who are away at school. Those children often have cars. The point being, I think it's entirely reasonable to conclude that there will be instances where families will reunite for vacations, if you will, in Rehoboth, and they will arrive in Rehoboth by different cars. I think the survey that was sent to the hotel owners bears that out. It clearly indicates that occasionally people do ask about additional parking, and they either service that parking or direct it to the city itself. The other thing I would point out is the requirement with respect to office space is, I think, actually a generous one if you look at the requirements that are established for other Delaware communities. It seemed that the most commonly used requirement there was actually one space for every 200 feet. So I note that we're actually establishing a more generous, but I think equally reasonable requirement there. And with respect to banquet areas, event space, the range of space and rules there are computed with a lot of different variables, but we do have examples in the American Planning Association standards of requirements for as little as one space for every 100 feet. So again, I think all of these requirements are appropriate and reasonable and within accepted ranges of values and rules established by others. I'd like to just point out one other thing that we haven't talked about. I think it's important to recognize that municipalities and hotel interests might look at these issues and these matters through different lenses. The municipalities often are going to be focused, like we are, on what parking is available, how people get to that municipality. In our case, we've already talked about the fact that we are not connected by airports, rails, subways. People have to drive here. They look at traffic congestion and the parking space that they have available. Hotel interests will look more through an economic lens. They'll look at, I believe, different demands, different uses, and their calculus may be slightly different, but I do not think these are irreconcilable analytical views. And I think that's borne out by the thoughtful, very thorough study that Wallace Montgomery has done, because the numbers there really reflect what I think has been proved out by a historical pattern of actual practice that has been embraced by both municipalities and the hotel interests.
So your vote is to approve?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that was a long way to get to saying that.
I was going to say, don't start over.
The resolution. Okay.
I'm going to vote yes on this, and I don't want to repeat what my esteemed colleagues have said, but it is obvious that we have a parking problem. Adding more housing and conference stock is going to exacerbate the problem, as Commissioner Hunter pointed out. And people don't get to Rehoboth by mass transit. So, and then supported by the Wallace Montgomery study and our survey of that the chamber did for us. For those reasons, I conclude that this is a reasonable increase where it is an increase, and an amendment to take out the obsolete one, and therefore I support it.
Mr. Dewey.
I will also vote in favor of the motion. As we're all very much aware, Rehoboth has gone through an incredible period of very rapid growth of late. In the Rehoboth of the 80s, many of us came here staying in private guest homes, and now people who, you know, Mary Bremer's, where Ava's Pizza restaurant is now. Yeah, there was a crowd of us in that house that no longer exists. And we all brought cars, and there were places for them to be. But Rehoboth has migrated to a hotel-based tourist economy, and changes in code have to recognize that. We are massing huge numbers of people on very small plots of land as compared to the former model in the 70s and 80s and early 90s of group rentals and private guest houses. So I believe it's appropriate, and this proposed change reflects the need to account for much higher concentrations of people in much smaller footprints on the land. I also consider this to be an appropriate incremental and manageable increase in parking requirements. I also appreciate that there were sections of the code that were quite ambiguous and potentially problematic, and hopefully this will go a long way to clarifying those issues. And I would also like to comment that this body has, through the work of Wallace Montgomery, as well as contributions of other members of the stakeholder communities, looked at a very broad range of data and quite a bit of depth of that data prior to making these recommendations. So for all those reasons, as well as others mentioned by others on the panel, I vote in favor.
Thank you. The chair votes in favor of the resolution as well, the motion and the resolution. A couple of things. It's all been eloquently expressed here today, and I thank all of you. This has been an interesting experience, and I think it shows. It shows. The hard work shows. A couple of things, though, that I would just mention. One is the library is leaving downtown. They may have a satellite office here, but parking is the problem. The problem is here. And what's different about Rehoboth in so many ways, but about particularly the way this city operates, is that what one sector does has a direct impact on the others, particularly business has on residential as far as parking is concerned. So if you continue to allow overflow parking to be distributed by permit, a daily parking permit in the residential areas, you're going to fill up the residential areas. And the CDP noted repeatedly the small town charm of Rehoboth Beach. And I think those who may disagree with what we've done here today should consider that if you make this city unattractive, they're not going to come here for your hotel or your restaurant or whatever else. So there's, I vote for it. I think it's, quite frankly, I think it's very fair. And certainly we recommend this to the Board of Commissioners for their action. Resolution passes 8-0 against and 1 abstention. Yes. Mr. Mehta, if you will forward that, please, to the Board of Commissioners. All right, under new business, I'd like to ask Mr. Mehta to review the pending site plan applications.
Mr. Chair, are you simply asking a status report as to where we are with various site plan applications?
Yes.
So at the next month's meeting of the Planning Commission, on the agenda will be an initial preliminary review of the Bellhaven Hotel site application 1221-05. There have been some documents, some correspondence between the chair of the Planning Commission and the applicant, including, as of today, the Planning Commission. I don't believe the Planning Commissioners have received it yet. By the way, before you, if I may suggest, before the Planning Commission leaves, I understand there's additional materials submitted by the applicant for you all to take home with you today in large sheets that are legible. My understanding is from Ms. Womack that they are downstairs and hopefully they'll be. Okay, well, so we'll have to figure out how to accommodate that. It would be anyway. So additional materials have been submitted, including in response to a letter from the chair to clarify how various prior drawings work together. And there was a letter received today from the applicant's lawyer providing some explanation with regard to the drawings that were submitted today, and hopefully will be available not in electronic form, but an actual large paper form that people can read. And Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want to address this. Your letter to the applicant, the Bellhaven applicant, also identified a number of issues that a facial reading of the application suggests the Planning Commission may need to take a look at. And my understanding is that and I don't believe the applicant is here today in public, but my understanding is the applicant was not able to respond to that, to your letter as of today, but may be seeking an extension until March 31st, the end of this month, to submit a letter to address some of the issues identified in your letter, even though that is more than 30 days prior to the April meeting. I'm sorry, less than 30 days prior to your April 14 meeting. You, the chair, has the discretion to waive that requirement, and/or the Planning Commission as a whole has the authority to waive that requirement if you so choose.
So this site plan would come for an initial preliminary review at the April meeting. And I think it was pointed out in my letter that this is being done to move this site plan along, even though it's not really ready for prime time review. Is that correct?
Well, your letter is in the public domain. I think the letter speaks for itself, but the letter noted not only the issue regarding the drawings, which have been resubmitted as of today, but also that the reviews from city staff, even if complete, presumably is complete, the letters, and this is all again in the public domain, on their face say that those letters do not, should not be construed as a conclusion that the site plan is code compliant.
Right. Now, interesting point here. We have asked for a lot of information from the applicant on this particular site plan, have given them deadlines to respond. In order to hear this at our April meeting, it would be necessary to waive our newly enacted rule of procedure that says that they have to have all written documents filed at least 30 days prior to the meeting. My question to you at the commission, as commissioners, is whether or not it may be appropriate to go ahead and waive that rule this time only as to these documents that they are to submit to us by March 31st. Yes, sir, Mr.
Given the complexity of this thing, which, based on the initial submittals going back a ways, it's so complex, why would we want to waive the 30 days? Because it's going to take several weeks to go through all of everything, the documents themselves and the drawings, to try to identify if it meets all the requirements we're supposed to evaluate to approve it. It just makes it that much more difficult and puts us in a very compromising situation to move forward when time is maybe of the essence to the applicant, but time is also of the essence to us, and it takes time to review massive documents. I mean, I personally take this very, very seriously in every application that comes in, whether it's big or small. And this is gigantic. And I don't see how it can be done more quickly. So I would personally, if we vote on it, I would vote against violating our 30-day rule.
Any other discussion? Susan?
I agree with that, and especially on top of your letter and the comments relating that it was not ripe for review. I mean, I don't know why we even get past that. And I certainly don't know, I wouldn't accelerate or waive a procedural requirement to move forward with a non-ripe thing that needs a procedural waiver so we can look at it faster. Understanding, the interests in moving this along expeditiously when things are presented with correct time to look at them.
That's why I ask. Mr. Dewey?
I concur with the comments just made, absolutely.
Earl? I agree. Julie?
I agree also.
Ms. Gay?
Makes sense.
Ms. Hunter?
I agree.
The answer is we will not waive the 30-day requirement for the filing of documents, and so that unless documents are filed 30 days or more before the meeting, we will not consider those. Is that correct?
So the April meeting is April 14. Just to be, I think it's very important to be clear, is the chair saying that there still will be a preliminary review meeting on April 14? It's just a question of what materials will be considered at that initial preliminary review meeting, or are you suggesting you're not going to have the preliminary review meeting? I would remind the chair and the planning commission and everybody that there can be more than one preliminary review meeting. The purpose of a preliminary review meeting under the code is simply to identify any factual or legal issues that need to be addressed before a public hearing is held with a vote, yay or nay, or with yay with conditions on the site application.
What's the consensus of the group?
From my count, the 30 days would then be next Wednesday, March 15th.
So they would have to submit any documents that we are to consider at the April meeting by,
If I'm counting right, that's what it is.
all right, and I'm looking for your comment, please.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhat confused. We've held preliminary reviews in the past, and people have come in, as just last month we did one. But it was, the applicant knew full well that we couldn't move forward, but they just wanted to get a flavor and get some hints as what's happening.
That was a
Concept review.
Concept review.
So I apologize. I forgot for a second. They're asking for a preliminary, not another concept review.
Correct.
Well, then I absolutely stand by my observation. You need the 30 days, period. If they want to do another concept review, peace be with you. Be more than happy to do that with the limited information and whatever that generates for them that's beneficial, terrific, and for us. But for a preliminary review, absolutely not. You need the 30 days because of the enormity of it.
Anyone else?
And I think, and maybe you're saying this, but it makes no sense to have a preliminary review on a record that the presenter says is not complete. Does it make sense? I mean, are we going to just have a placeholder for whatever issues are in this latest document? I mean, doesn't it have to be reviewed?
In the totality.
Yeah, and isn't that the rationale behind having the review, is all available information that the presenter wants is in front of us with 30 days for us to consider, and then we review it?
Our requirements are already published for a preliminary review requires that the application be substantially complete. And what we're hearing is it's not substantially complete. So the only thing that I would be willing as a member of this committee, I'd be more than happy to go through a concept review, which, a concept review, somebody can come in with a sheet of paper that just has a line drawing on it. If they want to do that, that's fine. But a preliminary review absolutely requires that it be substantially complete. And so far, what we received, it's not even close. And it wasn't even legible, for that matter, some of the drawings.
Mr. Ellison.
As an architect, I'm always happy to talk and discuss and communicate, but I do agree with my colleague here that all of that belongs not at the preliminary review, it belongs at the concept stage. And I think we're beyond that at this point, and now we're getting into, all of the technical matters that they simply have to provide information in response to. So I'm not in favor of having them come in April if they're not ready.
All right. Mr. Mehta, will you get in contact with their counsel and share with him that the opportunity for a second concept review may be available at April 14th, but an initial site plan review based upon what we've received so far does not appear to be a productive exercise for this body.
I want to make sure that I understand. There may be a difference because they're not here today as well on the agenda. They may very well take the position that the site plan is ready for site plan review. The issue that I had brought up is that in response to your letter, Mr. Chair, they had asked for additional time to respond to the letter for purposes of the preliminary review meeting. Again, the purpose of a preliminary review meeting is to ascertain whether additional factual or legal issues need to be clarified before a public hearing is held and a final vote is held. by this body on a site plan. Um, uh, So if, I think it would be appropriate, based on the sentiment expressed here, to convey clearly to the applicant that any additional materials to be considered by this body prior to April 14 should be submitted by April 15.
March 15th.
March
If
15.
my counting is right.
March 15. I respectfully suggest that we consider perhaps in executive session the notion of not having a preliminary review meeting in April.
All right. We can do that at this time, or we can do that at
You
the
can
end.
move, if you want to move into executive session, you can move into executive session in open session. You can move to go in open session, you can move to go into executive session if you would like. And then there would be an executive session meeting. You come back to the meeting, and although the communications during executive session are confidential, the result of the executive session discussion is presented publicly.
Okay. Do we need a motion and
We're going to take public comment before we do
vote?
that, or not? Up to you.
Sure. Mr. Trejo?
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Trejos. I would just briefly say that I'm the adjacent property owner in the southwest corner. I'm one of the property owners, co-owners of the properties located at 1516 South Boardwalk and 1 Wilmington Avenue, which would be Gus and Gus, Starkey's, the Rave 5 and 10, the other Starkey's Waffle, and the Zogs and Zogs Bar and Grill. I totally concur with the sentiment that this has to be within the time frame as we're speaking of. This matter is very consequential to us as adjacent property owners. Not only myself to the southeast, but to Go Fish at 24 Rehoboth Avenue to the northwest. We must have this information timely in hand so that I can formulate an appropriate response to the consequential impacts that this will have on our properties. Such a short time frame will not allow me to have that opportunity to make the appropriate arguments that I've done in the past regarding public safety, FEMA, and the rest. And so therefore, I would concur with the denial of that request. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Please come forward, state your name.
Hi, I'm Alison. I'm the owner of Go Fish Restaurant and the building at 24 Rehoboth Avenue. Sorry, I was a little late to the meeting, but I agree with the parking. I was a little late on it, but I agree with that. I mean, as a business owner with a hotel that's bringing food service and other amenities, then there's definitely going to be overflow of traffic on the street, taking up parking spaces and business away from other restaurants. I mean, I've been in Rehoboth now at Go Fish for over 20 years, and the parking situation has gotten worse as time's gone on, honestly. The amount of people, I mean, that is why, honestly, I chose to go on the highway. And the first year I opened Go Brett on the highway, I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of business from Go Fish to the highway, simply because people could park there. And I mean, I have the documentation to back that up. It was profound. I had no idea. I felt like I cut my arm off, honestly. And the main reason was that there's nowhere to park. Even year-round, when the meters go away, you've got construction trucks in the springtime, mostly taking up those parking spaces, employees, because there's nowhere for them to park. I also spend upward of $10,000 a year for renting parking spaces for my employees so that I know that they will come to work. I mean, that's just money out the door because there's nowhere for my employees to park. So the parking thing, I fully back. I think that was a great decision. As far as giving extra time for this, I mean, I'm a business owner too. And I mean, we between us represent 100% of the businesses that are impacted by this building. I mean, it goes out from there, but we are directly back up to this potential building site for the duration of the build out. And I mean, I have issues with the fire safety, putting fires out. I missed that meeting. Unfortunately, I had COVID and I was deathly ill that day. So I missed that previous meeting. But, you know, I'm not happy that my building be used as a potential for putting a fire out in the hotel. Also, my kitchen is way at the back of my property. So if there were a fire in my building, I have issues with that as well, because I potentially could be landlocked behind my building, whereas now I have a fire exit out there. I've never had a fire in my restaurant, but look, fires happen in restaurants. So there's that as well. And I just think the time frame for all of you to get your ducks in the row for the plans, if you want to build a hotel, then have your stuff ready, is all I'm saying. But anyway, so that's it. I do have other issues as well. I don't know if this is the time to bring them up, but I'm greatly impacted. I have solar panels on my roof. That was a $160,000 project that went up in 2010.
Well, what I might say, ma'am, is we're really focused on a procedural issue here.
Right, okay, all right.
And
I'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, the substantive
anyway.
issues will,
All right,
feel,
okay, thank you.
just come back again. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? In Virginia, we call it closed meeting.
Moved. So moved.
So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we are in an executive session. Yeah. So I can report our vote. Thank you for your patience. Here we go. As a result of the executive session and the discussions therein, it's been determined that the Planning Commission will conduct an initial preliminary site plan review of the Bellhaven application at its monthly meeting on April 14th, 2023. The Planning Commission will review and consider only those materials that are timely filed as in accordance with our rules of procedure, which sets a 30-day window that must be complied with. So any materials filed less than 30 days prior to the April 14th meeting will not be considered as part of that initial preliminary site plan review. Anything else, Mr.?
Very quickly, in terms of other site plans in the pipeline, that we've already received some information with regard to, for the Atlantic Crown project, this body had a project concept review that some of you referred to, as you may recall, and this was confirmed in a letter by the chair to the applicant that there were questions at the project concept review that had not been fully answered, and another project concept review meeting with respect to the Atlantic Crown project will be scheduled when this body receives the information requested from the applicant. With regard to one Rehoboth, it is my understanding, our understanding, that the applicant is seeking a variance from the Board of Adjustment, or will be seeking a variance from the Board of Adjustment before seeking a preliminary review from this body.
Is there anything further? Our public comment is done, sir. I say our public comment section. Are you asking to speak about one of the site plans that we just talked about? Because I thought you spoke about that previously.
The comments that we had made was with regard to the procedural matter. I have not made my comments yet with regard to the letters that have been part of the file.
I think it may be more appropriate to do that at the initial preliminary site plan review.
All I wanted to do was give you all a handout of material that's already on the public record.
All right, sir, why don't you submit that to the city secretary?
I have. She has
Okay.
it right there. It's already a public record.
Okay.
And she also has the ability to send it, attach the already public matter to the current files. If you would all please hand that out to everyone here so that you can review the material ahead of time.
She'll do that, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir, thank you. Anyone else? Well, I hate to say it, but we're adjourned.
It's been so much fun. If I had known about that, I would have everybody else. Sorry about that.